It started with a house that was too quiet. On the morning of October 14th, a quiet suburban street looked exactly as it always did. Neatly trimmed lawns, parked cars, and the faint sound of a dog barking somewhere down the block. But inside one of the houses on Maplewood Drive, something had gone terribly wrong. By the time police arrived, they would walk into a crime scene so strange that even experienced investigators struggled to explain it. A crime scene that to this day still makes no sense. 38-year-old Daniel Harper had lived on Maplewood Drive for nearly 5 years. He wasn't the kind of person who attracted attention. Daniel worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized financial firm downtown. His co-workers described him as organized, dependable, and quiet, someone who rarely missed deadlines and almost never called in sick. Outside of work, Daniel's life was simple. He enjoyed cooking, watching old crime documentaries, and occasionally meeting friends for dinner. His younger sister, Melissa, lived about 20 minutes away and visited him often. To the people who knew him, Daniel was steady, predictable, the kind of person you wouldn't expect to be connected to anything unusual, which is why what happened that night shocked everyone who knew him. The evening before Daniel died had been completely ordinary. Security cameras from a convenience store down the street showed him stopping by around 7:40 p.m. to buy a bottle of sparkling water and a frozen dinner. He looked calm, even smiling briefly at the cashier before leaving. By 8:15 p.m., Daniel was back home. According to data later recovered from his television and internet router, he spent the evening watching a crime documentary series while answering a few work emails. Nothing appeared out of place. At 10:52 p.m., Daniel sent a short text message to a co-worker about a report they were finishing together. It would be the last confirmed message he ever sent. Sometime after midnight, something happened inside that house, and no one heard a thing. The next morning, Daniel didn't show up for work. At first, nobody thought much of it, but by early afternoon, when repeated calls went straight to voicemail, concern began to grow. Daniel was not the kind of person who disappeared without explanation. Around 3:30 p.m., his sister Melissa decided to drive over to his house to check on him. When she arrived, everything looked normal. His car was in the driveway. The front porch light was still on. Melissa knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. At first, she assumed he was sleeping, but as she stepped back from the door, something inside the living room caught her eye. Through the window, she could see Daniel lying on the floor, completely still. Melissa called 911. When police arrived minutes later, they immediately noticed something strange. The front door was locked.
So was the back door.
Every window in the house was shut and secured from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere. Officers eventually entered the house through a spare key Melissa provided. Inside, the scene looked almost peaceful. Daniel Harper was lying on the living room floor beside the couch. There was no overturned furniture, no shattered glass, no obvious evidence of a struggle. The room looked as if someone had simply paused life in the middle of an ordinary evening, except Daniel was dead. At first glance, investigators expected to quickly determine what had happened. But within minutes, the crime scene began raising questions. The first strange detail involved Daniel's phone. It was sitting on the coffee table just inches from his hand. But when detectives powered it on, they discovered something unsettling. Every message, every contact, every piece of data had been completely erased. Someone had wiped the device clean. Even more confusing, there were no fingerprints on it. Not even Daniel's. Detectives spent the next several days interviewing everyone who knew him. Co-workers described Daniel as responsible but increasingly anxious in recent weeks. One colleague remembered him mentioning that he felt like someone had been watching him. Another said Daniel had recently started leaving work earlier than usual. When investigators spoke with Melissa again, she revealed something she had initially dismissed as paranoia. 2 weeks before his death, Daniel had replaced the locks on his house. He told her it was just a precaution, but he never explained why. As the investigation continued, detectives explored several possible suspects. A former business partner Daniel had argued with months earlier, a neighbor who had complained about loud music, even a co-worker who had recently been fired. But none of these leads went anywhere. There was no evidence placing anyone inside the house that night. And that brought investigators back to the most troubling question of all. If someone had committed this crime, how did they get inside? And more importantly, how did they leave? Weeks turned into months. Forensic teams examined every inch of the house. They checked the ventilation system, the attic, even the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Nothing. No hidden entrances, no secret passages, no clues explaining how an attacker could have entered and exited. Without leaving a trace, it was as if the crime had happened in a locked room. Then, several months later, investigators discovered something that added another layer of mystery. Security footage from a camera, 3 houses down, showed a shadowy figure walking past Daniel's house shortly after midnight on the night he died. The footage was blurry and captured from a distance. The figure's face was impossible to identify. But investigators noticed something unsettling. The person appeared to walk past the house and then vanish from the camera frame. There was no footage showing them leaving the street. Years have passed since Daniel Harper's death. The case file has grown thicker with reports, interviews, and unanswered questions. But the central mystery has never changed. A locked house, no signs of entry, a wiped phone, and a man who seemed increasingly afraid of something he never explained. To this day, investigators still revisit the evidence, hoping one overlooked detail might finally reveal the truth. But for now, the case remains unsolved, a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling crimes are not the ones with clear answers. They're the ones that leave behind a scene that makes absolutely no sense.